Hello, I'm Paul Larson. Author Marty Podskoch is a retired reading teacher who spent years researching and writing about fire towers in the state of New York. He's also collected stories from the Adirondack region, stories originally published in a newspaper column and illustrated by comic book illustrator Sam Glanzman. In this author visit, the Colchester, Connecticut writer invites us into a world full of Adirondack stories. You've written some books for young readers called Adirondack Stories, and you have a second volume. What's one of your favorite stories?
Well, one of my favorite stories is Snowy Mountain Surprise.
Let's hear some of it.
On a damp fall day in 1950 on Snowy Mountain, fire observer Teddy Blanchard was eating lunch in the cabin with fellow observer Joe Savary from Wakely Mountain. As they enjoyed a venison sandwich and hot tea, the cabin door burst open. A huge black bear stood upright in the doorway. Teddy fired his Iver Johnson .38 revolver. Click! In the meantime, Joe was throwing firewood at the slowly advancing beast. Distracted, the bear backed out and then came in again. And again, the Iver Johnson misfired. Click, click. Joe ran out of wood and grabbed the hot tea kettle and threw it in the bear's face. Scalded in rage, the bear crushed it beneath his paws, roared and charged. Bang! The Iver Johnson finally fired, and the bear fell, mortally wounded.
That is a great story.
Right.
What's an unusual story in your collection?
One of the unusual stories I ran across is Lady of the Lake. I had been driving up Route 30 toward Malone. I stopped in a bar restaurant, and a guy at the bar says, boy, didn't you ever hear of Lady of the Lake story? And so I did research on that story and found out that there was this woman from New Jersey. She was the dean of the New Jersey Women's College near New Brunswick. And she had a place on Lake Placid. In 1933, she took a boat ride by herself on the lake, and she never came home. 30 years later, there were two divers diving in the lake, and they found a body, perfectly intact, with a rope around her neck and the anchor of the boat. She apparently committed suicide, and the cold water kept the body intact for 30 years.
There are stories of her actually haunting the area.
Right. Some people think that, you know, this is, she's come back alive at nighttime.
This is a very provocative collection of stories. Who's the illustrator?
Sam Glanzman. He is from a little town near Oneonta, New York. And I noticed this man, a story about him in the Oneonta paper, and I invited him to come to our book fair. And about a couple years later, in the year 2003, he called me up. He said, Marty, I don't have much time to live. I'm 80 years old. Let's do something together. So I said, let's do something on the Adirondacks, which would be illustrated stories and a little caption about some particular person or event in the Adirondacks.
So these originally appeared as very short stories in newspapers, and now they're in book form. What do you think of them as a whole, as a collection, these short vignettes? Because when I read them, it almost seems like I want to know more about them, and it inspires me to find out more about each one of these stories.
Right. I'm a reading teacher, and I tried to get my students interested in reading. So I'm trying to get adults too, and children, to read a little bit more. So you might read the story about Noah Rondo, 140 words, and then you might want to learn more about him. So you might go to your bookstore or to the library and then read the whole book.
What does it say about the Adirondack region that so many really fascinating stories can come right from here?
The Adirondacks were a place where people could find peace and quiet. The presidents came up here. the actors, Kate Smith, the guy who did Tarzan. He even bought a place there on Rainbow Lake and had a swimming camp, Buster Crabbe.
There's also in this collection a story about Bigfoot, and a rather frightening one. What happened there?
I never met the people personally. I got the story by telephone. The family had moved out of Elizabethtown and moved to Cortland. So one evening I called them up and I talked to the daughters and the wife of the story. And the story went like this. Hank McCoy was the observer on Hurricane Mountain near Elizabethtown. And the family would go up there in the summertime and live with the observer, with the father. So the tower was on the mountain, and then about a mile down was where the cabin was. So after a day up there on the tower, he came down to the cabin. The kids were 5 kids in this small cabin. And after supper, or during supper, Flo, the wife, and Hank got into an argument. And Flo said, we got into a spat, and Hank stormed out of the cabin, and he's walking down the trail. And as he was walking down towards the lean-to, he sees this hulking figure, hairy figure, crunching through the woods. And of course, he got so scared, he started running back to the cab, and he came in, he said, Flo, there's something huge out there, and it's following me. I'm going to go into the bedroom and get the .22. So he went in the bedroom, got the .22, went on the porch, and as he's looking out, he sees about 25 feet away from him this maybe 10 foot, 8 foot tall, hairy creature. And he looks at it with his .22 and he says, there's no way I'm going to stop this with a .22. He ran back in the cabin. He said, Flo, we've got to hide the kids fast. I'm really afraid what's going to happen to them. And there was an opening up there in the attic. And they lifted the kids up there and they said, now kids, I want you to be very quiet. There's something very big out there, and you just got to be very quiet. They closed up the hatchway, and they closed the lights, barricaded the door, and Hank and Flo quietly sat on the bed just waiting, her with their flashlight and him with the .22. And then all of a sudden the cabin just started shaking. And I asked the girls on the telephone, how was it being up there, you know, in this attic and the cabin is shaking? They said, Marty, we were scared. We didn't know what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden, the shaking stopped. So Hank and Florence quietly went out to the window, looked out, and as they looked out, they could see this creature, whatever it was, running down the trail, and it gave out one of these blood-curdling screeches and then disappeared. They quickly told the kids, come down, it's safe now. And of course they tried to calm them down, and I said, did you tell the forest ranger, the people in Elizabethtown, what happened that night? They said, are you crazy? If we ever told them, they would thought we were crazy. And then about 10 years later, when they had TV, they moved out of the tower, they saw the TV shows with Bigfoot. And then they said they heard that scream and they saw the figure, and they said, then we know what we had seen there that night. Bigfoot on Hurricane Mountain. Was Bigfoot on, on Hurricane Mountain, or was it a bear? Who knows what it was, but it was a good story.
Yeah, it makes for a very nice read in your book. What's enjoyable about writing books?
Well, it's nice to, as an author, to be able to save these stories about the people, because without me doing this, they would have been gone. And so I'm probably one of the few people who drive throughout the Adirondacks gathering the stories, and I enjoy just meeting the people, saving the stories, and then the sense of accomplishment. Well, I have 5 books done. Well, I'm going to try to get number 6 done. And hopefully I'll have the energy to keep going, to keep gathering these stories and continue writing books.
Author Visits is a production of Mountain Lake PBS. More information about the authors and their books can be found on the Author Visit section of our webpage at mountainlake.org.